Courage isn't always a big, brave moment. Sometimes courage is one sentence you've been avoiding. I can't keep doing this. I'm not okay with this anymore. Those sentences may sound simple, but when you've built your identity around keeping the peace, staying strong, or fixing everything, or never disappointing anyone, one honest sentence can interrupt an entire pattern. And for some people, those sentences feel terrifying. Not because they're dramatic, but because they interrupt an old identity. And if you've been the peacekeeper, telling the truth can feel dangerous. If you've always been the fixer, stepping back can feel like you're letting people down. If you've always been the strong one, asking for help can feel like you're suddenly weak. And if you've been the person who doesn't disappoint anyone, saying no can feel almost impossible. That's why courage matters so much when you're rebuilding your identity, because you can have clarity. You can know who you're becoming. You can recognize what's draining your energy. You can understand the old belief beneath the pattern, even. But at some point, you still have to make a different choice. And that takes courage. Not perfect courage, honest courage. I think a lot of people wait until they're ready. They wait until they're no longer scared. They wait until everyone understands, or until they know exactly how the conversation will go. They wait until they can guarantee the outcome. But if you wait until courage feels comfortable, you may wait for the rest of your life, because courage often feels uncomfortable. It's asking you to stop obeying fear, and fear doesn't like losing control, especially when fear has been protecting you for so long. I know what it's like to avoid things because the cost felt way too high. Hard conversations, boundaries, decisions, admitting the truth, even admitting to myself that I wanted something different. Sometimes I didn't avoid those things because I didn't care. I avoided them because I knew that once I told the truth, I couldn't unknow it anymore. And that's one of the hardest parts. Truth creates responsibility. Once you admit this isn't working, now you have to decide what you're going to do with that. Once you admit, I'm not okay, it becomes harder to keep pretending that you are. Once you admit, I've been living from fear, you have to decide whether fear still gets the final say. And if you admit, I keep saying yes because I'm afraid of disappointing people, you have to decide whether you'll keep abandoning yourself to avoid their reaction. Truth doesn't force you to change everything immediately, but it does remove the comfort of pretending you don't know. And that's where courage begins, not with a perfect plan, with an honest admission. Sometimes you're not tired only because life is hard. Sometimes you're tired because you keep living in the gap between what you know is true, and what you're willing to say out loud. That gap takes energy. Pretending takes energy. Smiling while carrying resentment takes energy. Keeping the peace at all costs takes energy. Trying to convince yourself you're okay with something you're not okay with takes a lot of energy. Courage doesn't only build confidence, sometimes courage gives you energy back because you stop spending so much of yourself pretending. And that doesn't mean you need to say everything you think. It doesn't mean you react emotionally and call it courage. It doesn't mean you confront every person about every offense. Honesty without wisdom can become recklessness, and honesty without self-control can become cruelty. Courage isn't saying whatever you want because you've decided your feelings are the only ones that matter. Courage is telling the truth responsibly. It's knowing what needs to be said, why it needs to be said, and when it should be said. And sometimes whether it's safe to say it directly at all. If you're dealing with someone who's abusive, threatening, or unpredictable, courage may not mean confronting that person alone or at all. Sometimes courage is protecting yourself wisely instead of proving how brave you are. So let's talk about the first part of courage. Where are you backing down? Not so you can shame yourself, just so you can notice. Where are you avoiding the conversation? Where are you delaying a decision? Where are you saying yes when the honest answer is no? Where are you staying quiet to keep a false peace? Where are you letting another person's possible reaction make your choices? Where are you shrinking because you're afraid of being misunderstood? Where are you waiting for permission you may never receive? Where are you hoping someone else will make the decision so you don't have to take responsibility for it? And that's important to recognize because avoidance has a cost. Avoiding the conversation may create temporary quiet, but resentment keeps building underneath it. Avoiding the decision may feel safer today, but it keeps you stuck tomorrow. Avoiding the boundary may keep someone else comfortable, but it keeps you exhausted. Avoiding the truth may protect the old version of your life, but it blocks the rebuilt version of you. And the longer you avoid something you know needs to be faced, the less you trust yourself. Because every time you say, I'll deal with it later, and then don't, you teach yourself that your own truth can be ignored. Every time you promise yourself, I won't allow that again, and then allow it again without addressing it, something in you notices. And that's why courage and self-trust are connected. You rebuild self-trust when your actions begin with matching what you know. And let's talk about fear. Fear isn't always the enemy. Sometimes fear is trying to protect you. It says, don't say that. They'll get angry. Don't ask for help. They'll think you're weak. Don't say no. They'll call you selfish. Don't try that. You could fail. Don't tell the truth. You might lose people. Fear is trying to keep you safe. And sometimes fear is warning you about genuine danger. We shouldn't dismiss that at all. If something truly feels unsafe, pay attention. Get support. Don't force yourself into a dangerous situation just to prove you have courage. But sometimes fear isn't responding to present danger. It's responding to an old experience, an old rejection, an old punishment, an old pattern, an old version of you who learned, if I speak, something bad will happen. If I disappoint someone, I'll lose connection. If I need help, I'll be shamed. If I make the wrong choice, I won't recover. Fear may be trying to protect you, but protection and leadership aren't the same thing. You can listen to what fear is saying without handing it the final decision. Fear can protect the old prison because at least the prison is familiar. Familiar doesn't mean healthy. Familiar doesn't mean true. And familiar doesn't mean God is asking you to stay there. So instead of only asking, how do I get rid of fear? Ask instead, what is fear trying to decide for me? Is fear deciding whether I speak, whether I ask for help, whether I set the boundary, or I try again, I tell the truth? You don't have to scream at fear. You can say, I hear you, but you don't get to lead this choice. That's courage. Safe isn't always the same as free. Safe isn't always aligned. And what feels safe isn't always obedience. Sometimes what feels safe is simply what you've always done. Stay quiet, keep accommodating, keep explaining, keep waiting, keep hoping someone else changes. Keep asking God to remove a situation while refusing to make the choices that's already yours to make. And I'm not saying that harshly. I've done all of these things because I didn't feel safe. I know there are situations where the options are complicated at best, where leaving isn't simple, where children, finances, health, culture, family, or safety are involved. Real courage respects the reality of the situation, but that reality can't become a permanent excuse for never taking a step. The next courageous step may not solve everything, but it can begin changing your direction. Courage often shows up in 4 areas: a conversation, a boundary, a decision, or an action. Let's look at each one. 1, a conversation. Maybe there is something you need to say, not to attack someone, not to unload every emotion, but to become honest. I want to talk about what happened. I need us to handle this differently. I haven't been honest about what I need. I'm not willing to keep pretending this is okay. A courageous conversation doesn't guarantee the other person will respond well. Courage controls your honesty and your conduct. It doesn't control their response. Number two, a boundary. Maybe courage looks like a boundary. I'm not available for that. I'm not comfortable with that. I need time before I answer. I won't continue this conversation while I'm being disrespected. I can help with this part, but I can't do all of it. A boundary isn't a demand that controls another person. It explains what you will do and what you will participate and what access you'll allow. It isn't you need to stop doing blank. A boundary could look like, if you keep blaming me instead of discussing the issue respectfully, I'm going to end the conversation. And that distinction matters because, again, it's not controlling others, it's controlling what you will do. Number three, a decision. Maybe there's a decision you've delayed because you're terrified of making the wrong choice. But refusing to decide is still a decision. It leaves the current situation in control. You may not have complete certainty, but most meaningful decisions don't come with complete certainty. You gather the information you can, you pray, you seek wise counsel, you consider the consequences, and then at some point you choose. Number four, an action. Maybe you already know what needs to happen. You need to send a message, book the appointment, ask for help, apply for a position, and the commitment, tell someone the truth, stop returning to the same situation, or take the first practical step towards something you've been praying about. Confidence often doesn't come before the action. It grows because you acted. And don't choose 10 things, choose one. Ask yourself, what's the next honest step? Maybe it's saying no. Maybe it's asking for help. Maybe it's booking the appointment. Maybe it's admitting what you want. Maybe it's stopping something that's been draining you. Maybe it's starting something you've delayed long enough. Maybe it's telling the truth to yourself before you tell anyone else. And then ask yourself, what am I afraid will happen? What support might I need? What will it cost me if I keep avoiding this? What would the rebuild version of me choose? That last question matters because courage isn't only about doing scary things. It's about choosing from the identity you're rebuilding. If the old identity says keep everyone happy, the rebuilt identity may say be honest and allow people to have their response. If the old says you can't handle this, the rebuild says I can take one step. If the old says don't disappoint them, the rebuild may say I can't keep abandoning myself to keep someone else comfortable. If the old says you must do this perfectly, the rebuild may say I can do this honestly, even if I do it imperfectly. And no, not everyone will always like it. And that's where courage becomes real. Sometimes we don't avoid things because we don't know what to do. We avoid them because we know someone may not like the new version of us. They may not like the boundary. They may not like the honesty from us. They may not like that we no longer answer immediately. They may not like that guilt no longer works as quickly. They may not like that we're asking them to carry their own responsibility. They may say, you've changed. You're selfish. You've become difficult. You used to be more forgiving or this or that. You think you're better than everyone now. And sometimes criticism contains truth, and we need to remain humble enough to examine it. Rebuilding your identity doesn't make every choice you make automatically healthy. You can set a boundary poorly. You can speak truth cruelly. You can become so focused on protecting yourself that you stop considering anyone else. So stay teachable. Ask, is there something here I need to own? But don't assume every negative reaction means you're wrong. Some people aren't reacting because your boundary is cruel. They're reacting because the old arrangement worked better for them. If someone only supports the version of you that abandons yourself, that's something you need to look at, and you need to know. They may like the version of you that never says no, never asks for help, never challenges anything, never expects them to take responsibility. But love that depends on your silence isn't healthy love. Support that disappears when you become honest wasn't supporting your growth at all. That doesn't mean you become bitter, it means you become clear. Not everyone who resists your growth is your enemy, but their resistance also doesn't get to decide who you're allowed to become. Courage tells the truth. It doesn't always burn bridges. It doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't have to be to humiliate anyone. It doesn't demand that everyone agree, but it does stop lying to maintain a peace that isn't real. Peace built on one person's silence isn't peace. A relationship built on one person's self-abandonment isn't mutual. Forgiveness that's demanded through threats isn't freely chosen. And help that's given through resentment or transactionally isn't sustainable. Courage brings those things into light. And if you're a person of faith, courage doesn't mean you never feel afraid. Faith doesn't require pretending fear isn't present. You can trust God and still feel your hand shake. You can pray and still need support. You can believe you're being led and still wish the road were easier. Courage says, I don't know exactly how this will turn out, but I know I can't keep letting fear make every decision. Sometimes we keep asking God to change the situation while He's asking us to use the courage, the wisdom, and self-control and voice He's already helping us develop. That doesn't mean you control every outcome. You don't. It means you become responsible for your obedience, your choices, and your conduct. You take the step you know is yours, and you release the outcome you can't control. This week, ask yourself, where am I backing down? What am I avoiding? What fear has been leading? What's that avoidance costing me? What's one honest step I can take? And then take that step. Small courage counts. Quiet courage counts. Shaky courage counts. A sentence, a boundary, a phone call, a no, and I need help counts. This matters to me counts. You don't need everyone to witness it. You don't need to make a big announcement. You don't need to prove anything. You need to practice making choices that match who you're becoming. Every time you take the next honest step, you teach yourself, I can tell the truth. I can make a choice. I can handle discomfort. I can stop letting fear run everything. That's how self-trust grows, not through promises about what you'll do someday, through the honest step you take today. You may not feel confident after the first step. You may still question yourself. You may replay the conversation. You may feel guilty. You may want to run back and make everyone comfortable again. That doesn't necessarily mean the step was wrong. New choices can feel wrong when the old pattern has felt normal for decades. Give yourself time, give yourself grace. Examine your choices honestly. Correct what needs correcting, but don't immediately undo a healthy decision just because it created discomfort. Discomfort is information. It isn't always instruction. Here's an exercise for you. Write down these 4 areas: conversation, boundary, decision, action. Under each one, write anything you've been avoiding. Then circle 1. Not the one that sounds most impressive. Choose the one that feels like the next honest step. Write down, what am I afraid will happen? What evidence supports that fear? What part of this fear may come from an old pattern? What's it costing me to avoid this? What support or preparation do I need? What would the person I'm becoming choose? What's one step I can take within the next 24 hours? Then take that step. Send the message. Write the first sentence. Put the appointment in your calendar. Tell yourself the truth. You don't have to complete the whole journey, but you do need to stop using the size of the journey as a reason not to take the first step. You can have clarity. You can know who you're becoming. You can know what's draining your energy. You can understand the pattern. But courage is often the bridge between knowing what needs to change and actually changing it. You don't need perfect courage. You don't need to be fearless. You need enough courage to take the next honest step. So say the sentence, set the boundary, make the decision, ask for help, take the action. Do it wisely, do it safely, do it with honesty. Do it while your voice is still shaking, if that's what it takes. If this teaching helped you, start with the 5-day identity rebuild. It'll help you recognize the pattern, name the belief underneath it, and begin choosing from the person you're becoming. You'll find the link in the description. And if you're ready to go deeper, join me for the Rebuild Your Identity Masterclass, because you can't build a new life from an old identity. And courage is often the bridge between the life you know you can't continue and the life you're finally willing to build.